So look, water in the end is the, if I may say, the point of the spear by which climate change is felt throughout. If you look at the most important challenges on climate change today, through droughts and through floods and cyclones and hurricanes, they're all related to water. And part of this seminar is to say, look, it's not only water and as an isolated topic or sector, it is water connecting to many areas of society. And therefore, in order to address food security, in order to make sure that agriculture can be done in a climate smart way, then water has to be at the center. More reliable water, better quality of water, better information on water so that farmers are able to make informed decisions about what is it that they're doing, adequate storage, adequate efficiency in the use of agricultural water, you name it. So what we're going to be discussing today actually is a little bit of what is the current state of agriculture and food security and the impacts of climate change on this situation. Good practices for building climate resilience and food security, particularly from the lens of water management. We're going to be discussing how can agricultural activities contribute to climate resilience and climate adaptation, particularly on the linkage to water again. A little bit of financial and institutional mechanisms we want to learn, because one of the challenges on agricultural water is that you have many stakeholders on the water side, and you have the Ministry of Agriculture, private sector farmers, agribusinesses, and therefore the tensions, the ability to connect across institutions, the capacity to mobilize the financing so that better adaptation and resilience is done for water to support agriculture and food security is really critical. And then finally, the role of communities, because in the end, adaptation cannot never be a top-down activity. In the end, it's user-based. The users are the ones that need to be not only stakeholders, but in the driving seat of this direction. So welcome again. It is a pleasure to have you all. If you have joined us now, welcome to the Water Adaptation Community webinar number 5, Climate Adaptation in Agriculture, Water for Food Security. My name is Ede Illas. I'm Senior Advisor with the Global Center on Adaptation and co-director of the State and Trends in Adaptation report series by GCA. And today we have a wonderful lineup of speakers that I'm going to be introducing, starting with Dr. Olu Ayayi, who is the Africa Program Lead Food Security and Rural Wellbeing in the Global Center on Adaptation. And Olu has been, for years, really at the forefront of developing programs and investment portfolios on digital agriculture, climate change, rural development, and more importantly, now really working within GCA with the most important financiers in the Africa region, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and others, in making sure that adaptation and resilience, and very importantly, digital climate solutions are mainstream and an integral part of those projects altogether. So he worked a lot for many, many years in CGIAR with 200 publications and the winner of the Diamond Author Prize on several years. So Olu, you have the opportunity to put a little bit of an overview on what is going to be our webinar today. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ede. Good morning, good afternoon or evening from whichever part of the world you are joining us. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to this very important water adaptation community webinar series that was initiated to amplify climate change adaptation issues on specific themes. Today's webinar, as we heard from Ede, is dedicated to discussing climate adaptation in agriculture, water for food. Climate change is a fundamental development issue. It's gone beyond just environment in Africa. The challenges of achieving sustainable development in the face of a changing climate is much more acute in Africa, perhaps more than anywhere else. This is because much of the critical sector, 10 of the top 10 countries that are most at risk to drought globally, they are in Africa. And climate change is expected to negatively impact as much as 56% of all crops in the sub-Saharan Africa by 2050. And in some countries, the yield from rain-fed agriculture could be reduced by up to half, by 50%. Incidentally, most of the smallholder farmers who produce over 2/3 of all food in the continent, they practice rain-fed farming. And as a result, they are very vulnerable to the vagaries of rainfall and weather patterns. In many cases, the high vulnerability to climate change causes recurrent, almost on a yearly basis, swings between food security, food scarcity, and food surplus for millions of households. Actions or inactions that are taken now, and of course in the next few years, therefore is extremely critical for the future of food systems in Africa. We can keep talking about the problems and challenges, but we are saying, where are the solutions? What is the response? So in response to the challenges and to promote adaptation action at scale, the Global Center on Adaptation and of course the African Development Bank led a consultative process to design an African Adaptation Acceleration Program, which we normally call AAAP. AAAP is an African-owned and African-led response to the continent's expressed needs and priorities to reduce its vulnerabilities as well as harness opportunities. The program's objective is to mobilize $25 billion to accelerate climate change adaptation across Africa in the next 5 years. Because of the importance of agriculture and food security in the continent, one of the key pillars of AAAP is the climate smart digital agricultural technologies. It seeks to harness the potential, the powers of digital technologies and innovations to improve agricultural productivity and strengthen climate resilience as a game changer to addressing many of the pressing climate concerns and rural transformation challenges which Africa faces today. It's been on record that smallholder farmers who adopt digital agri technologies can increase their yield and income between 40% to 70%. The goal of this particular pillar of the AAAP is to scale up access to climate smart digital adaptation solutions for at least 30 million smallholder farmers in Africa, and to support resilient food systems in 26 countries, and to reduce malnutrition for at least 10 million people. We can't talk of food security without talking about water. So central to addressing food security in the continent is a request for securing water for agriculture, because agriculture accounts for about 70% of total water use. The need for rethinking and redesigning agriculture, especially in dry lands and other drought-prone areas, is very critical in the continent. And this has led to growing interest in solutions that have to do with agricultural soil and water to benefit climate resilience and adaptation. An example is Southern African region, or region that have just one rainfall distribution. In Southern African region, for example, more than 60% of all the rainfall for the whole year occurs between just about 3 to 4 months. And so if anything happens during that period, there's the consequences for the whole year. This webinar will highlight the linkages between water and food security and showcase areas in which we can address water security through improved water management. I know there is so much going on in the world today. And so if you have found time to join this session, it's an indication that the topic of today's webinar means so much to you. So I'm extremely pleased that we have been able to gather top-notch experts in this domain from across the world. And they have been identified to provide insights on the topic and to share with us their rich experience on the same. As I begin to round up, let me cite a statement made by our CEO, Patrick, just 2 days ago. He said, investing in water adaptation in Africa is not only the right thing to do, it is also economically smart. I hope today's webinar inspires ideas and discussions around the ways that we can make agriculture and food security in Africa to be water smart. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Oli.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity to open and give us the context from the GCA Africa region on those important connections between water, climate change, and agriculture and food security. If you have just joined us, welcome to the Water Adaptation Community webinar number 5 on this topic. My name is Adaptation, Senior Advisor to the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation. And now we're going to get into the presentations. And we have a great lineup. And we're going to start with Ian Noble. Ian Noble to be talking to us on the current state of agriculture and food security in relation to climate change impacts in the African context. Ian is a senior advisor also to the Global Center on Adaptation. He's a professor emeritus at the ANU, the Australian National University. Ian and I had the pleasure to work together in the World Bank, where he was really our lead top climate change adaptation specialist at the World Bank, who helped us push the envelope on what does it mean to do adaptation years, if not decades before. Now it has become an important topic. He currently provides advice to many governments and UN agencies on how to measure adaptation effectiveness, how to allocate funds accordingly, and how to monitor and evaluation adaptation related development programs. So it is a great pleasure to have with us Ian. Ian, you have 10 minutes for your overview. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Is that showing up correctly?
It is coming up right now, so we can see it. Please go ahead. Excellent.
Right. Okay. Well, Eddie's given the complete introduction. It's actually a significant week for me. I mean, I've been involved in climate change adaptation since the 1980s, and to see the final or the current IPCC sort of round sort of finishing with huge exhortations to do more in this whole area is excellent to see. We run into my usual problem. It won't move forward. Sorry, I tested this earlier. All worked.
Hi, Ian. If I may, if you click on the slide and then press the forward button, maybe that will move.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. That's the tip I was missing completely. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to talk about the the current state of agriculture and food security in relation to water, and obviously in Africa. I mean, currently 1 in 5 people in Africa face hunger each year. That's double the rate of any other region, comparable region in the world, and also it is increasing, where many other parts of the world it's decreasing. In the Malabo Declaration in 2014, it set a goal of ending hunger across Africa by 2025. Now, many of the sub-goals are being met, but so far only 1 country is on track to end hunger. I won't go into put names on these things and so on, but you can probably pick it out there from the little diagram on the left. Also, one of the conclusions in the review just recently completed is that climate change is stalling, delaying progress almost everywhere in Africa. Now, what sort of climate should we be planning for? I'm not going to go into detail here, but just summarising some of the IPCC conclusions that we've seen. Clearly, we must continue to strive for a climate outcome that keeps us below 1.5 degrees Celsius. But as adaptation specialists, or working on adaptation, we must prepare for a worse case than that. So we have to prepare for, say, 2 degrees by 2050 and 3 degrees by 2100. They're gloomy estimates, but I think we have to be ready for it. We also have to be ready for relatively new impacts that most people haven't thought about very much. For example, life-threatening heat, which will make outdoor work in daytime difficult in many parts of the world, and especially in Africa. The figure on the right just shows you those deep, or the red, any darkish red areas, shows there's going to be a significant increase in the days where people will simply find it very, very difficult to work outdoors for anything more than literally sometimes minutes to an hour or so. Rainfall, look, both dry periods, wet periods, the 1 in 100-year event is going to change to be 1 in 40 or 1 in 20 within this century. That is just an incredible impact. Drought conditions will increase across most of the regions because basically rainfall will come in packets, either a lot of rain or no rain. Also, some parts of Africa are going to shift into essentially much more arid conditions, certainly across the north and especially the northwest, and also major parts of southern Africa. If you want to see more of this, look at the IPCC Atlas, which came out with the Working Group 1 report. It has an incredible amount of detail, but it's readily and easily accessible by anybody. You don't need specialist skills to look at and see it and work with it. What are some of the recent impacts? Back in the 80s, we talked about the droughts in Ethiopia and Sudan. 450,000 lives lost, 16 million livelihoods disrupted. Things are improving since then. Deaths have decreased enormously. Why? Well, partly good news. Partly it's better social safety nets. Work for food programs and similar programs, I'll look into the naming of them all. They work, they are working. They're stopping, but people don't die in droughts now, or fewer people do. But there's also changing attribution. With better medical facilities, even though they're not certainly far from perfect, doctors are actually saying that this person didn't die from drought, they died from pneumonia, they died from diarrhea, they died from something else. So in fact, we have to be very careful about some of these trends that we see based on these sorts of data, these broad disaster-based data. Floods claim fewer lives, but they affect even more livelihoods. And we have to really focus on livelihoods because they are the ones that have the impact on the huge numbers of people, and they affect the development of those people's lives for maybe the rest of their life. Flood losses have increased 5-fold since the 1990s. Now, a lot of that is because more people are moving to the cities along the great rivers of Africa or some of the coastal cities, and so there are actually more people being exposed. But also there is also the flooding of those rivers is increasing as well. Look, there are numerous estimates of what's happening and so on, but the messaging is consistent. Without effective adaptation, millions more Africans will go hungry. The lives of undernourished children will be blighted forever. More people will be exposed to flood hazards, and secondary impacts of climate change, for example, on mitigation, will increase. I'm not going to go into the drylands in details, but just point out that 2/3 of Africa is actually drylands. It supports 40% of the population. Most of the agriculture there, as we heard earlier, is rain-fed. If you look at the last year's State and Trends report, you'll see a positive vision for what can happen there. Yes, they accept the problems of the drylands, but they look forward to what can be done there. And that's what we have to do across Africa in looking at adaptation, and especially the world water and adaptation. We must act. The cost of action versus inaction is blatant. I won't go into the details here, but basically, if an estimate based on the IFPRI's impact modelling says essentially, if we're already spending $6 billion a year, essentially trying to make agriculture more resilient in Africa. If to account for climate change over the next 5 years, that'll go up, that we need another $9 billion a year, $15 billion per year across that period. The current external support is about $1 to $2 billion per year, so you can see there's a big gap there. If we don't do anything, then the annual cost of meeting the needs with no adaptation action, that is bringing people to a reasonable livelihood, is $200 billion per year, massively more. And half of that is going to be required for crisis water management. The benefit cost ratios of many of the actions we take are at least 8 to 1, some of them much better. So much of adaptation will involve sustainable land management and water management, which will also have co-benefits, especially if we can do that with nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation. So the benefits are even greater than what we see there. Water and food security. Look, it's already been said, but the most adaptive responses to climate change involve the greater use of water for agriculture. but there's going to be greater competition for water across all sectors. So water management will need to deal with increasing demand in an environment that is a total environment that is both increasingly variable and very much unlike the past. Only 3% of sub-Saharan African agriculture is irrigated, and much of that irrigation is wasteful. We can increase irrigation efficiency, but at the same time, cropping patterns, agricultural systems are going to be shifting underneath us, not just because of climate change, but because of all sorts of other commercial factors. And water demands will be changing. So we're managing in a changing system where changes are coming from various factors other than climate change. So in this situation, political, institutional, commercial, and managerial issues are just as important as technologies. So how should we respond? There's going to be wholesale change in what people eat, some of it driven by climate change, but much of it driven by social preferences. Existing technologies will need to be repurposed. For example, there'll be changes in crop types. With rain-fed agriculture, we do need to shift to more precision irrigation and deficit irrigation, that is, irrigation which is tops up when the rains fail. There's no use to simply saying this. We have to ask the question, how are we going to do that? We need to reduce food waste. We need climate-smart agriculture investment plans, that is, plans which deliver skills and finance. There are new technologies and approaches. These have huge promise. Climate information services, digital solutions, etc., etc. However, it's easier to create the visions and have catchy names for them than to do the hard slog of implementing them or the learning by doing. And that is the challenge that we face right now. That is to take these new technologies and see the potential that we can see is out there and see that actually realized on the ground. And that's my session, that's my comments, and I look forward to the rest of the discussions. Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think that one of the most important numbers that you put is the cost of action versus inaction. And this is one of the most, in a way, shocking numbers to say, look, it's not feasible not to take action because it's just too expensive. One can think that, no, I don't have money to invest on adaptation, but the reality is that doing nothing is more expensive than doing something. But there is not enough money. I mean, post-COVID, with the potential economic crisis and food crisis because of Ukraine, with challenges all around Africa in this process, then figuring out how to be as effective as possible and your recommendations, or really where to start with, instead of just using slogans, are really important conclusions out of that conversation. And we need to make a pitch of the report that you and I and Jamal Sagir prepared on the State and Trends in Adaptation 2021, that was solely focused on Africa, and the agricultural chapter and the water chapter bring many of these conversations into this process if you're interested to learn more. Now, let me invite Dr. Karen Wilhoff, who is a principal researcher and the coordinator on Groundwater at the International Water Management Institute. She's going to be talking about the role of groundwater and food security from the local to the global scale, and how groundwater has to play a really important role on the resilience of agricultural food security, but also how dangerous it is to use groundwater without a perspective of sustainability. We have seen groundwater aquifers collapsing around the world because it is not seen, and therefore it becomes really complicated. But the technology has allowed fundamental changes recently. I think that the understanding that groundwater can be and should be a really integral part of the solution is fantastic. So Karen chairs the Groundwater Solutions Initiative for Policy and Practice, which is a global partnership of 30 international organizations supporting the sustainable development, use, and the management of groundwater. She has a PhD in hydrogeology and has worked for DHI Water and Environment and Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland. She has been an editor of 8 books and special issues, and author of more than 90 peer-reviewed international journal articles. It is a great pleasure to have you with us, Karen. Thank you so much for talking on this really important topic to make sure that it becomes a tool a really important tool for climate adaptation and resilience for food security in Africa. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ede, for this opportunity to join you today in this very important webinar. I've been following the Global Center on Adaptation for some time, and glad to say that I think you're doing great work. And so I'm happy to sort of give my sort of perspective today on the work that I've been involved in over the last many years, together with IMI and many other partners, which relates to the topic of groundwater, as you just mentioned, and under that special aspects of food security under climate change. So without further ado, I will just give you my quick overview here. Nothing to be surprised about, but I will focus a bit on the Africa context, because this is sort of the frame of what we've been introducing today. So I'm happy to give you an overview in that regard. But first, I will be starting a little bit from the top, looking at overarching issues and the global perspectives with regard to groundwater. So basically saying, yeah, climate change is giving us higher variability. This is from the Limpopo Basin. The main stem is going dry every year now due to climate change and human interactions. This is a very sort of common trend that we see across Southern Africa, huge impacts of climate change. I think that message has already been driven home by the introducers to this webinar. Also, the food perspective, I think, is also very clear. And you can see here to the left, Sub-Saharan Africa at the top of the vulnerable regions in the world in terms of food insecurity. Now, the groundwater aspects, I just want to sort of start here because this year is the UN Year of Groundwater, and the World Water Development Report this year has been dedicated to groundwater. So just to say that there's a lot of momentum around focus on groundwater now globally, and to get that into the development agenda basically, and also to see how we can both develop groundwater but also protect it, as Ede was mentioning. And so this is a good reference document for you to have a closer look at. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I must also say I appreciate the GCA for also including groundwater in your state and trends report. I saw that there was some mentioning of that. Usually it's not really coming forward in these types of reports. So I really appreciate that this is being also considered, and also for this opportunity today to bring it into the discussion. Now, groundwater in Africa, we've just sort of listed where it fits in. And there's many of the SDGs that, of course, it sort of contributes to. But here we're just going to focus on the climate aspects and the food aspects. There's also, of course, wash aspects, there's ecosystems aspects, and there's also the integration and stability that comes from groundwater cooperation, both nationally and internationally. Now, just some overarching global figures. So it's a great, agriculture is the largest groundwater user globally. About 70% of all the groundwater used is going into agriculture. And so that tells us this is something we really need to address. About 40% of the global food production is produced by groundwater globally. And here you can see the trends. This is actually from the World Water Development Report of groundwater use globally. And you can see this is sparked from the 1950s and onwards. And we are really peaking now in terms of groundwater use. You can see some leveling off, but still some countries like Sub-Saharan Africa are still to develop their groundwater resources. And this has, in many parts of the world, created problems. It already alluded to that. And this is just exemplifying the context, for instance, in India, where you have very green, lush fields, but you actually have a hidden drought underneath, and groundwater has to be lifted from 300 meters depth to supply water for agriculture. The opposite is actually the case in Africa, where you have very dry lands, as we mentioned before, and then you have your groundwater just below your feet, but it's not really being developed. Now, just to see the context globally again, you can see here where groundwater is being abstracted, the red areas, and I've encircled the most important ones. And you'll see in the next maps how these areas coincide with where we have intense irrigation. There's a good correlation there. And there's also a good correlation with where we have limited replenishment of the resource. And that already tells us that there's potential trouble here, because the resource is used extensively, but it's not being replenished to a large degree. Now, going back to Africa, two aspects I think are important to mention is that we have different contexts, first of all. It's not the same conditions all over. And the resource can be sort of divided into where we have large storage and where we have large recharge. To the left, you can see the countries that have a lot of storage. Some of it is not being replenished, so it's what we call fossil groundwater. To the right, you can see where the recharge is high. Here we have smaller, often aquifers, and they're being recharged every year. So they're more drought vulnerable. If you have many years of droughts, they can run into trouble. Whereas the storage countries are more vulnerable to long-term depletion. I just mentioned again the context in like India, and here's the context in Africa. So groundwater below the feet, but it's not really being developed. And we're talking about economic water scarcity more than a real physical water scarcity. Now going back to the food aspects in Africa, just to compare the South Asia region with the African context or the continent, you can see the differences here, and the numbers speak to themselves. We did some work to identify where the potential for groundwater development and irrigation is in Africa. You can see the green areas there. There's a lot of potential in the Sahel and also in the north-south eastern tract of the continent. We also did a specific analysis regarding impacts of climate change on groundwater. And you can see a lot of curves here. And what we found was that groundwater is basically replenished during high floods, during extreme events. And you can have 10 years between significant recharge events. And this really needs to be considered when we're looking at how to manage our groundwater. We also found that in certain areas, groundwater levels are actually increasing, which means that there's even a bigger potential for development for irrigation and other purposes. We also found that the El Nino, or the El Nino and La Nina phenomena are giving very diverse results or impacts across the continent. So we can have floods and droughts across the continents at the same time. And of course, this also influences on droughts and the groundwater conditions, basically. We did some investigations around how we can use information around these events in terms of actually informing seasonal forecasting and how that can be used for farmers in terms of managing their groundwater resources and keeping track of their storage, basically, so that within those 10 years where they have drought situations in the groundwater, whether they can make sure that they capture the floods during those high events and keep their livelihoods going, basically. One thing that I think is very important to mention is the value chain that we have for groundwater in agriculture, because many factors are important for having successful irrigation in Africa. And this is not only for groundwater irrigations, but it does have certain aspects that we need to look into, like wells, pumps, and energy that are specific for groundwater. And these aspects all have to come together to make it successful. So we did some work on these aspects as well. Now coming to some of the, let's say, success stories or tools in our toolbox that we can look at when we're looking at groundwater for irrigation, and especially for climate smart irrigation. So we have solar irrigation, which is being taken up now across the continent, and especially for pumping groundwater, which gives farmers a much better resilience against droughts and more secure livelihoods and incomes and food security, basically. Looking at the groundwater, we have seen progress in terms of developing more manual drilling, which enables much more farmers to get access to groundwater, basically. And then also in terms of climate change, how do we capture those floods underground? So we are looking very much into that with many partners in our GRIP network. I'll come back to that. to see how can we actually enhance and take advantage of those high impact or high events and make the floods into a positive aspect. We have also looked at how we can improve irrigation efficiency using groundwater. This was actually from work in a transboundary aquifer. So we also use the transboundary work to actually get groundwater more on the agenda, and even in a livelihoods perspective. This is some new work looking at how we can reuse wastewater from the groundwater by recharging it, and then further downstream abstracting it and using it for irrigation. And of course, there's many aspects to this to make sure it's safe and healthy and so on, but it is being applied in Africa, and we're looking into how to sort of improve those conditions and approaches. This sort of all evolves around what we call nature-based solutions, basically, and how we're looking into how groundwater can play a significant role in that. We're talking about groundwater-based natural infrastructure, and here's a lot of different cases, and it's not all about managed aquifer recharge, like I mentioned. It's also about payment for ecosystems. It's about remediation of groundwater, all in terms of enhancing both the water security and the resilience from the groundwater and the subsurface. Also, citizen science, we talked about digital innovations. We're working with farmers for them to capture the data and be more self-reliant in terms of managing their groundwater resources. And also keeping track of the groundwater through various water balance approaches that we're working on, both in terms of modeling, but also simple tools that can be applied by the farmers. And also looking at land use changes, there's good tools there that we can look at to see where is irrigation actually increasing, where do we have to worry much more about impacts on climate resources and downstream populations and so on. Finally, big data, I mentioned a little bit about data before, but also looking at how we can use innovative solutions like pumps that are smart and can be measured from the sky and can give us information about how much groundwater is being pumped, and then feed that back to the farmers. Some work that IMI has been involved in. Now, this is getting to my final slides here. So just mentioning also that IMI and partners are working closely with AMCOW, which is the African Ministers' Council on Water, the apex body for water, for WASH and for water resources management in Africa. And they now have a groundwater program where they are specifically looking into how to support the countries in terms of better management of groundwater resources and increasing livelihoods, resilience, and so on. So this is a very nice progress. You can see the white paper here that we published at the World Water Forum a couple of weeks back. And the website highlighting the program. And then finally, on the GRIP network that was mentioned by Eddie. So we're working together with about 30 partners to really bring the aspects of groundwater to the forefront of the political and sort of development agenda, not only in Africa, but across the developing countries. Key messages: groundwater plays a growing role in global food security and resilience for Africa. Groundwater is key to climate smart agriculture, and it's increasingly adopted. Stakeholders at local and to continental level are exploring new opportunities for filling data gaps on groundwater and setting up collaboration networks. And there has to be focus on this irrigation value chain that I mentioned. Also women and youth, I didn't talk much about that, but I think it's coming through a lot. And then local management of the resources. So I think I'll stop there.
Karen, thank you very much. Look, we are having questions coming through the chat room, and I want to ask you one. Not before, but before, I want to make a pitch for the fantastic white paper that you put together a couple of weeks ago. I think that is fundamental. It should be mandatory reading for everybody who is really dealing with issues of climate adaptation in Africa, in agriculture, because groundwater is at the core of the solution. But one question, look, if a minister in Africa comes and says, look, Karen, we really don't know much about Africa. We cannot have a sense that groundwater is important. What are the first 2 or 3 things that we need to do in the country to start dealing with this issue? What would you say? Top 1, 2, 3.
That's a very, very good question, Eddie, and thanks for that. I think, first of all, the countries in Africa are at very different levels in terms of their sort of acknowledgement and sort of attention to groundwater. But on the general, everybody is getting it more on board and starting to implement and to face exactly what you're saying. I think for me, the first point is to make clear that groundwater is so essential for resilience, and it has to be part of the resilience, strategies that are put in place for agriculture, for other things. And that is the first thing. Get groundwater into those agendas, to get it into the strategies, and to make then more informed decisions on how do we then take the next steps in terms of getting the knowledge base, seeing where the hotspots are in terms of either underdevelopment or overdevelopment, and then, develop the capacity in the countries, because the capacity in terms of human capacity, institutional capacity, is quite low in most countries. And so we're also working on that front, but it really needs to come up as well to be able to implement.
Absolutely. So you just put it super there. Raise groundwater as part of the solution, get data, understand the hotspots, build the capacity, start moving step by step. Karen, thank you very much for this. We have a couple of other general questions. One of you asked whether the presentations are going to be posted, and with approval of the presenters, we're going to have them in the Water Adaptation Community website. Please join us there. There's going to be the video, access to the video, and a summary of the seminar. So please join us into this important space altogether. Now, let me pass the word to our next speaker, who is going to be Samuel Thiongo from the Mazingira Institute, who's going to be talking about urban agriculture and good practices for building climate and water resilience in Nairobi, Kenya. Samuel is a project coordinator of the Mazingira Institute, which is a civil society organization based in Nairobi, and he works on the Urban Food System Project, which is trying to apply a systems approach to urban food. Among other things, his work in the Nairobi urban food system includes enhancing climate resilience in urban and peri-urban agriculture based on very practical agroecological principles. And Samuel not only talks about it, he's also a peri-urban farmer outside Nairobi. So great to hear from a practitioner that is really tackling this important issue of urban and peri-urban food systems. Samuel, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me today. Now that other speakers have focused generally on agriculture, I will apply an urban lens in my presentation to share with you lessons from Nairobi on how urban agriculture is contributing to climate change, but more importantly, what urban farmers in Nairobi are doing to contribute to climate adaptation. Now, this project, we do it under our Urban Food System project, where we promote a place-based food system that is localized and that enhances well-being of the consumers as well as the ecosystem. Now, to go right to urban agriculture in Nairobi, I will share with you for both policy and practice. I want to move to the next slide. Yes, to set a little bit of the context in urban agriculture Nairobi, the map that you're seeing right in front of you in the green area is the urban center. And then we have other surrounding regions where urban agriculture is practiced. And we have Nairobi, where it's limited space, though the farmers tend to use the available public spaces, while in the peri-urban regions, farmers have access to small plots of land where they practice their peri-urban agriculture. In Nairobi informal settlements, we have very limited spaces for agriculture, so we use some other innovative technologies, which include sack gardening and other container gardening. In terms of the context, we have the policy side. In Nairobi City County Government, we have an Urban Agriculture Promotion and Regulation Act. And this act provides for the local authorities to provide land and water for sustainable urban agriculture. So Nairobi is one of the leading cities in the world to have policy on urban agriculture, and that supports urban food systems in a sustainable way. Now coming to how this act is implemented in terms of practice, it is done in a circular economy principle that ensures minimal use of natural resources and where the production systems are environmentally friendly, and goes a step further to prevent wastage and also includes recovering and reusing waste as resources. In taking a food systems approach to this, we'll start with production and show you how farmers in Nairobi are producing food, and that is appropriate for the environment and contributing to climate adaptation. And the first example is integration of both crop and livestock production. We have these farmers using animal manure as organic fertilizer for crop production. You know, manure from animals is a key source of methane gas that, you know, is a major gas that is contributing to absorption so much heat in the atmosphere. And when it is reused to produce crops, that removes it from the environment where it would dirtify the environment. And the other waste from crops is used as feed for the livestock. The other production technique, as you can see in this picture, is use of containers to plant vegetables in an urban area. It's water smart, saving water and using a wick. So you only put enough here and observe it from time to time. The other component is on processing, and where we have our women and youth groups producing, among other things, peanut butter. They use plastic containers for packaging, and this contributes to a clean environment that would otherwise see these plastic containers being thrown around and clogging drainages or being thrown in water bodies such as oceans and rivers. That part is on distribution. We exercise localized food systems that allow for short food supply chains to do, among other things, reduce food transport related carbon prints. And this was good during the COVID-19 era when we were in lockdown. We encouraged community gardens where would have producers connect directly with the consumers, so we do not rely so much from food transported far regions from Nairobi. And the other thing in terms of a systems approach is on consumption, where we encourage reduction of food waste and to serve only enough to limit wasting. And when we limit food waste, this would of course mean that we reduce pressure on production systems to produce more and more food. And the last component of our food system is on waste management, and where we have farmers recycling organic waste from food markets to feed their livestock. Now an area we would have in food markets being thrown just around and clogging drainages, but we have urban farmers coming to the rescue. They use this food waste to feed their livestock. And the other part is on recycling animal manure to use it as input for crop production. As you can see in this photo, this is the iron sheet you're seeing. That is a place for keeping dairy goats that's producing this manure, and then it is used to plant crops that you see in the background. So this reflects to the integrated crop and livestock production that I talked on earlier. Another part on waste management is on composting. As you can see in this photo, we have the crop waste and trees being cut and they are put into compost. And this compost is used to plant crops that you're seeing in the background. So in all our urban agriculture trainings practice, we strongly encourage agroecology because for one thing, it encourages use of resources, natural resources, and also limits use of pesticides, which over the years research has shown that is spoiling the soil health, has a negative impact to consumers who partake of foods produced through very strong pesticides. So with all these lessons that we have learned, how can we improve on them and upscale them, that they are not just done in urban areas, but we have them done in rural areas? Now, the opportunities for improvement, the first one would be in increasing resources for funding of research to understand more about the relationship between agriculture and climate change, then use that evidence to act on and implement initiatives that see agriculture contribute more to climate adaptation than it contributes to climate crisis. So this is one of the areas that we really need to look forward as we proceed. The other one is having urban planning policy and practice to include urban agriculture, urban forestry, and green spaces for climate change mitigation in urban areas. Would have planting of more trees in urban areas and parks and green spaces, and also include cleaning of rivers to avoid flooding. And the last one would be to encourage and expand agricultural practices that we have seen are contributing positively to the environment, and this largely being on agroecology. And a big thank you and greetings from
Samuel,
Nairobi.
thank you very much for that very practical presentation. If I may ask one question, in terms of climate change impacts, how are you dealing with the droughts that you may be facing in Nairobi? How do you use climate and weather information to say, look, El Niño is coming and we're going to have drier conditions? Are you using that? Do you think that that would be useful? What are your colleagues working on peri-urban agriculture doing? Give us a 1 minute summary of how climate is affecting you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. As everywhere else in the world, climate has been affecting all aspects of life, including agriculture. And we have had our farmers complaining that the rain patterns have changed. The crops may be drying on the soil because of lack of water. There's no feed to feed the livestock. And in the recent past, we have been engaging through other things that include use of wastewater, but use it in appropriate ways that has been proven and safe for crop production. And the other thing is to sensitize the farmers not to rely too much on rain-fed agriculture. And that's why you have seen, I've shared with you that lesson in that picture that is employing climate smart agriculture, if you can call it that way, that is enhancing water resilience. So in the face of constraints with limited water, we have some innovations, very local and applicable to the local context, being used by these farmers to adapt to the climate crisis that is affecting their livelihoods.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Samuel, for that. We also have another general question saying, look, somebody from Ghana participant saying, look, how to engage with GCA in the possibility to start exploring initiatives on projects. And I encourage you to go and visit the website of the GCA, where there is a periodic call for partnerships. You can describe what is it that you're doing and finding opportunities either with GCA or others to explore ways in which climate adaptation and resilience can be enhanced in the African continent. If you have more questions, please post them in the chat. I will be asking to the different panelists. And I want to invite now Mr. McPherson Nethara to be talking about how to leverage water efficient and climate friendly practices in agriculture for adaptation. A practitioner for the field, Mr. McPherson Nethara is the Chief Land Resources Conservation Officer, working for the Ministry of Agriculture in Malawi. He's also president of the Rainwater Harvesting Association Malawi since 2016. He has been working on sustainable land and water management for decades, both as a practitioner and as a consultant. And the last 10 years, he has been promoting various rainwater harvesting technologies for domestic and agricultural uses. It was great. I heard that you presented in Dakar in the recent World Water Forum some of your experiences, and we look forward to hearing from you. What are those experiences in that process? I know that you are in very difficult connection conditions, so we really, truly appreciate the opportunity. I see you were in a car, so thank you so much for connecting.
Yes, I'm sitting in a car.
Much appreciated. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Somebody who is really
Thank
passionate about adaptation. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Indeed, I'm traveling in a car, but I'm lucky that I have connection at the moment. So the title of my presentation is Leveraging Water Efficient.
So we are having a little bit of connection difficulties, but my person is somebody who actually is a resourceful man. So he already prepared a video of the presentation. So long, I think that we're gonna go to the presentation because the connection is so hard. And as McPherson he's able to connect from the house he's arriving, then we're gonna be able to do the question and answer. So Long, please go ahead and show us the video of the presentation. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ada.
And while the video is coming up, let me invite you again to write questions. I see that there are a couple for Samuel that I will be asking him in a moment. So thank you so much for all of your questions. While Long puts the video from McPherson, but we're going to be able to have questions and answers with him as soon as he's able to complete his trip. Go ahead, Long.
Yes, I suppose my screen is on.
Your screen is on. Yes, please.
Yeah, I will play the recorded message.
Thank you.
The convener, as I've already been introduced, my name is McPherson, the Rainwater Harvesting Association of Malawi. I had to make a recording of my presentation because I'm on the road and I may have limited network as I'm traveling. So I thought I should share my presentation through the recording. But if there's any feedback or questions, I can respond because I should be able to have access to WhatsApp. So I should be able to give any feedback during plenary. So the title of my presentation, Water Efficient and Climate Friendly Practices in Agriculture for Adaptation. And to begin with, Malawi, when you look at climate change, the impacts of climate change are evident in Malawi. We have felt the impacts. It has been reported that temperatures have increased by almost 0.90 degrees Celsius between 1960 and 2006. And one of the regions in Malawi experienced the highest temperature of 46 degrees Celsius last summer. But also we have seen changes in the rainfall patterns and predictable onset of the rains. We used to get rains around October, but now we get the rains around November, even December. This year was particularly difficult because we had the rains in January. It's been really a very difficult year, and this is one of the evidence for climate change in Malawi. And because of these effects, we are seeing a lot of dry spells, droughts, floods. Floods are annual here in Malawi. But also in terms of agricultural productivity, because of these effects, it is anticipated that there shall be a decline in area under maize and bean production by the year 2050, compared to the reduction of 20% which has been observed between 1970 and 2000. So these are some of the effects here, as you can see in the pictures: dry spells, hailstones, but also floods. So as Rainwater Harvesting Association of Malawi, we have been around can we think of rainwater harvesting beyond the tanks? Can we make rainwater harvesting an instrument for adaptation, resilience, better water management, regreening, and we should. Though at the moment the reality is quite different. Due to uncontrolled runoff, we see a lot of land degradation, erosion and sedimentation, localized flooding. This flooding happening in low-lying areas, even in urban areas, we're also seeing this flooding. Waterlogging, which is causing loss of crops and also health problems, but also dust, mostly in the unpaved roads. So rainwater harvesting for climate resilience and food security. Why? As an association, over protection, they can also stem erosion and promote good land management. At the same time, rainwater restoration. And when we look at the food, water, energy nexus, I think one of the most notable agricultural practices that we have been promoting is the climate smart agriculture. Rainwater harvesting being a part and parcel of this climate smart agriculture. So climate smart agriculture, defined as agriculture that sustainably increases productivity, promotes resilience through adaptation practices, and removes greenhouse gases through mitigation actions, thereby contributing to the achievement of the national food security. This is according to FAO 2012. Three specific objectives of climate smart agriculture as practiced in Malawi are to help communities to adapt to climate change, contribute to, and most importantly, to improve food security. So there are a number of climate smart promoted, but I would like to focus on the technologies for and retention. Most notably, the use of borrow pits, the use of farm ponds and earth dams, infiltration pits and swales. These are low-cost agronomic practices which farmers do in their fields. Box ridging, conservation agriculture, but also water use efficient irrigation systems that are fundamental for increasing production and addressing the increasing irregularity of rainfall patterns. Here I'm looking at the use of drip irrigation. Farmers are using water use efficient irrigation system to increase agriculture production, especially during the long dry season. So there are a number of things that can be done. I'm talking about the in-situ water harvesting technologies, low-cost technologies, like you can see on the top left, infiltration pits which are drawing water from roadsides into farmers' fields, thereby increasing the moisture in the field so that the dry spells. But also tree planting, agroforestry incorporated in there. And the approaches we have been using mostly looking at the micro catchment, the bigger catchment at the household level. So we are using the landscape and watershed approach. But also in terms of mobilizing the communities, we use the integrated participatory watershed development tools. So all these are helping to in forest and agricultural landscape restoration. We also have got the Green Roads Initiative, which has been promoted by Metameta, and now it's a global movement to turn our roads from being conventional roads to green roads, thereby helping to increase productivity, improve water security, but also at the same time risk management. So these are just some examples of the technologies that we have also been promoting in Malawi, production of high-value crops using residual moisture because we have recharged the soil moisture, the use of farm ponds in integrated aquaculture agriculture. So farmers being able to produce fish, banana production around the fish, the water is used for irrigation, but also, like I mentioned, borrow pits being used for irrigation purposes. But we have also been promoting these ferrocement tank at community level, like this one was ferrocement tank at a school, which is promoting permaculture. This was done in collaboration with one of our partners, Scope Malawi. Key activities in terms of promoting these interventions has been the need for scale. So Rainwater Harvesting Association participates in various workshops, symposia. In this case, we had the National Green Climate Conference, where we had a pavilion, and we were able to host the state president and the first lady on the top left, where we were explaining the different water harvesting technologies that we're doing. So that we're doing in schools, we had students from the schools displaying some of the products from their permaculture gardens. So the impacts can be very, very positive in terms of adaptation and mitigation, increasing soil moisture. When you have restored the vegetation in the landscape, there are also mitigation benefits, but also reduction of flooding. If you can see network, but through road water harvesting, you can see on the right that the road is now passable, but also the crops on the roadsides are benefiting from the increased soil moisture. At farm level, climate smart agriculture interventions, like climate smart input use, certified improved seed, drought tolerant crops and livestock, improved varieties that can address adverse effects of climate change. Climate smart manure management. So we are also promoting the use of organic manure. We train the farmers on how to make compost manure, which can lead to low, but also a number of other climate smart farm practices, in situ water harvesting, soil and water conservation, agroforestry. Institutional and the financial mechanisms. The key, I think, for us is to be able to bring different partners. Ongoing initiative, and we're looking at a wide range of stakeholders from government departments, NGOs, faith groups, research institutions, special interest groups like the Music Association of Malawi, people with, living with albinism, donor agencies, the media also being key. So being able to create a platform where all the stakeholders can speak a common language and you can move in the same direction, I think that's what is going to be key in practices. Transformative solutions, like I indicated earlier on, we are looking at a watershed landscape approach. So we need to look outside the box. We need to look beyond the household or the farm level and look at the watershed. What interventions can we do at the top that can have cascading effects downstream? But we're also looking at social marketing approach to land and water management in order to influence behavior and mindset change. But what is also key in all these initiatives is putting people first. So community-led initiatives, locally adaptable solutions, being able to demonstrate the impacts and benefits. In the event of the floods that we have seen here in Malawi, we are also looking at mainstreaming rainwater harvesting in disaster risk management. So construction of large-scale or medium-scale dams in the upper catchment to reduce the volume of runoff that can lead to the reduction of flooding incidents downstream. So as Rainwater Harvesting Association, we are looking at creating a mass movement on rainwater harvesting, changing of the mindset. People should learn how to value rainwater. But we are also establishing a green village where we can demonstrate these technologies. We have a target of 2,000 calabash systems in the next 2 years. And currently we are working on a bigger watershed management project in collaboration with our colleagues. We are also looking to see how best we can have the green road finance so that our road networks have water harvesting. But we're also looking at developing a learning alliance. They are all part of this initiative. Also, we would like to introduce industry standards, but the most important thing is to have a pragmatic collaboration with stakeholders in order to achieve sustainable development. So in a nutshell, that's what we are doing as Rainwater Harvesting Association. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be looking forward for any feedback during plenary. Thank you very much.
McPherson, thank you very much. We heard your presentation. You're a very resourceful man.
Thank you.
So thank you for recording that. Any additional reflection from the car?
Yeah, we're moving on. It's well towards the end of the rainy season, so we're looking at the crop stand that we're visiting some farmers to see.
Thank you so much, McPherson. I think that we appreciate so much that you are connected by the car. The connection is very spotty, but if you want to connect without the video, that may be helpful for us to hear you on your reflections. I have a few questions that I want to start posing to the panelists from people who have either in the chat room or have submitted questions. And let me try to group them into three, and then I'm going to go around each of the panelists. So first, the problems are so huge that the question is, what would be the most practical basic steps to take in the next, let's say, 5 years in the context of agricultural water use in Africa, knowing that there's not enough money, knowing that the COVID caused one of the most important recessions in the country, knowing that there's going to be food security issues because of the Ukraine war, knowing that there's going to be continuous crisis to floods and droughts. What are the practical first few things from your perspective that can be done in the next 5 years? No more than one or two, so that we can start getting a sense from all of you on what can be done. Second, many of the technologies that are discussed are generally expensive. So for example, drip irrigation or precision irrigation are actually quite expensive. So what can be done to either reduce the cost of those technologies or use other technologies that may be equally good, but may not be as expensive into this process? And then finally, a question from my side, it is the question of data and information. What is your sense of how important it is to have digital access in your mobile phone about what is going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months, the projections on weather information, to make more informed decisions? How important it is to do digital climate information solutions to help farmers all around. So if I may go with the panelists in the same order that you did these presentations, you do not have to answer all three questions. You can pick 1, 2, or 3. And then again, the first one, practical steps over the 5 years in the middle of this difficult financial situation. Second, what to do with expensive technologies. Third, do you think that climate information services through your phone can be a useful part of the solution that you have been discussing? So let me go first to Ian, then to Karen, then to Samuel, and then to McPherson. Ian, do you want to pick 1, 2, or 3 of those questions?
Okay, thanks, Eddie, for some tough questions. Look, in what can we do in the next 5 years or so, I think the point is that we have to respond to the world as it is. So we know that things are going to change with Ukraine situation. We know things have changed with COVID and so on. But I think we have to go on acknowledging that climate change is occurring and it is going to have an impact. So it's a case of taking, it's not just another risk, it's also an opportunity. So we know that adapting, even small steps, is very much better than not adapting at all. So, you know, it's a decision that everyone has to make to the best of their ability, given the resources, the skill sets and everything else. On digital information, look, the more digital information we can get, the better, but we must remember that predicting the climate, you know, 5 years, 10 years hence is difficult. Predicting the weather is very, very, very difficult. So the idea that we are going to have, we're starting to get to the point where we can get good seasonal forecasts, but they are just that, they're good and they're not perfect. So don't become too reliant on them, but listen to them and make whatever actions you can to improve things. But we're not going to make great advances in that area soon, and I know a lot of people are hanging up for the virtually impossible. I'm sorry to be pessimistic on that particular point, but that's the reality of it all.
Wonderful. Let me go to Karen, and then we'll go to Samuel and McPherson in that order. Karen, your thoughts on either practical steps in the next 5 years, what to do with expensive technologies, and what do you think of digital information solutions in the context of groundwater, if you want to do that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ede. So from my perspective and sort of looking at it in the context of groundwater, I think we saw quite a lot of good examples actually from the last two presentations of, you know, how groundwater is actually being taken up by farmers and being applied, and it's becoming part of the solution space, if you like. And so I would really like to see that this sort of work on the ground is also informed by more information around the resource, so that we make sure again that these approaches are long-term sustainable in a resource perspective. And I think we are sort of almost there. I mean, we're coming from different perspectives, but the tools are basically there. It's maybe a matter of bringing the people together around these aspects and see again where the crunch points are, in both in terms of quality and quantity and so on, and support, you know, from a sort of evidence base where we have further opportunities to develop groundwater and to also replenish it, as was mentioned quite strongly in the last presentation. So I think there's a good scope there. I already mentioned the fact that just having groundwater mentioned as an explicit kind of component of climate resilience, I think is very crucial for drought resilience, for drought proofing and so on. I think we saw the example from Cape Town that was running out of water basically. And luckily they hadn't developed their groundwater resources and also other resources. So they were in a fortunate situation to be able to step in and sort of, you know, recover the situation by bringing in those aspects. But if we can do that in a more proactive rather than reactive way, and making sure we know ahead of time where do we have the good resources that we can develop, maybe we can even develop some resources and have them sort of set aside for emergencies. We can make sure that we don't have quality aspects and saltwater intrusion. That's an aspect that's seen a lot now in Africa as well along the coast, and it's inflicting a lot of people. So seeing how we can, you know, really adapt through a climate and a groundwater lens, I think that's where I would like to point. And then on the digital data and the solutions, maybe in terms of farmers, I think there are cheaper methods that we can bring in that can help farmers save water. If they can use these very simple tools that I was mentioning to monitor their soil moisture and also some of the chemical parameters, they can actually save a lot. They can save more than 50% of the water bill and the energy bill and the input to fertilizers and so on. So it's a cost benefit altogether. It's not just the cost, but it's also the savings that I'm involved. So some work needs to be done, I think, in that space. I also mentioned some new technologies with remote sensing and so on. I think there's a good space there to develop further tools that can help us make sure that groundwater development is sustainable. And yeah, I think that's more or less what I wanted to bring forward.
Wonderful. Karen, thank you so much for your answers, full of interesting information, super exciting. Let me go to Samuel and then to Macpherson to close the seminar. Samuel, your thoughts on those three questions? You can pick 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. In terms of moving forward for the practical actions, one thing we'd first have to do is understand the relationship between agriculture and climate change, and most importantly, how agriculture is contributing to climate crisis. And then once we understand that, we commit a spirited and widespread campaign for agroecology that has been proven that it is safe for the planet, it's safe for the consumers, and we try and move away from industrial agriculture that proposes technology and pesticides to improve food security, but that has been demonstrated to do otherwise by destroying soil health and being inaccessible to farmers who cannot afford such technologies and websites. In terms of technologies, whether being expensive, we have seen through these sessions that we have technologies which are already being applied in the rural areas by smallholder farmers and which are not necessarily expensive. What we have technologies which apply to the local contexts and the country constraints of these smallholder farmers. What we can do is outscale them and have other many more people use these technologies. And we have seen manual use of systems for groundwater, solar panels. So they're already there, applied to the local context and constraints. Let's outscale them. And on the use of digital information, is we can really try to package information about climate change, what is happening, and the possible solutions. And we package this information in an easy and understandable format for use by all actors across the food system.
Samuel, thank you very much. And I don't know if Macpherson can hear us, if you have any comments on those 3 questions. And if you're still in the car, we don't need to see you, just the voice would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to agree with the guy from, as we've seen the simple technologies, the low-cost agronomic practices which communities are doing. And the communities can see the difference immediately. We need to leverage on that. And as my colleague mentioned, see how we can outscale those technologies from an individual level to a community level to a regional level. I think that's the practical steps that we are looking at. These are going to be difficult, as we have said. The COVID, we have the Russia-Ukraine. What are the implications going forward? Important also is to see how we mobilize the mindset of the communities that we are working with. So more than just the resources or the financial resources we are putting in the basket, but how can we also influence the mindset of the communities that we are working with so that they can learn to value their land, they can learn to value the rainwater in other stations, then the adoption and upscaling in terms of the data, the potential that we have in youth.
Wonderful. I think that we lost Macpherson into this process. Let me then begin to conclude this seminar with a big thank you to all of our speakers, Ian, Karen, Samuel, Macpherson, and of course, all for opening the session. An invitation to join the Water Adaptation Community platform where this conversation will continue, where you can find a summary of the presentation, where you will be able to see the video. Please share with your colleagues. and also where the presentations will be posted. Join us for the next water adaptation community webinar. I think that this is a series where water and its connections to all aspects of the economy become really important. So thank you so very much for all of the attendees. Thank you for our speakers, and thank you for Long, Celine, and the entire GCA team that is helping us putting all together as a job, etc. Many thanks for joining us today, and let's keep on trying to find continuous solutions for climate change and adaptation, and the important link to agricultural food security in Africa. All the best. Thank you so much.